Recently, I had a birthday, which I didn't admit to. It wasn't a 0-1. But it did trigger a Facebook photo of a birthday that I had 9 years ago. It was a special memory of celebration with my brothers, actually, and Newton, and we happened to be in Spain because a couple of us were working there for a little while. And as I thought about the 9 years since that photo, I was so struck by not only how much had happened, but how blessed we've been in so many ways. Doesn't mean there haven't been hard times during that time, of course, but I was quite aware and overwhelmed of the graces of God over that time and before, of course. But and sometimes we're even more aware of those graces when life's tough. Nehemiah chapter 9 reminds us that looking backwards can be part of our spiritual reflection and growth. In most of the chapter, Ezra recounts the story of the Israelites' history, where they've experienced God's mercy, forgiveness, provision, and blessing, which I've called the God story. And the very human story of getting out of touch with what God holds and offers them and us. While at this stage in the Nehemiah story, the temple and wall have been built, this chapter seems to be about the rebuilding of hearts, the inner work, the necessary work at this stage in Nehemiah. Talking of hearts, in Proverbs 4:23, the scriptures say, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." This morning we'll take a bit of a look at what it might mean to keep our hearts with all vigilance. Some of you are aware that I was privileged to join a women's Sacred Wells pilgrimage in Ireland in May of this year. Most mornings we gathered for a time of quiet meditation and prayer, led by one of the pilgrim leaders. At the end of that prayer, we said the words, "We know we are loved. We know we are blessed. We know we belong." And it's been part of my daily remembering of the goodness and significance of God in our lives. And it's in that spirit that I would like to acknowledge the Dja-dja-wurrung and Taungurung peoples, because I believe their continuing culture can inform us all. From the wounds of the past, may they too know that they are loved, blessed, and belong, as we walk together in places and spaces of reconciliation. Like many of us in Australia with a settler heritage, our roots come from afar. We can feel disconnected from some of the traditions and heritage of our ancestors. There seems to be a deep impulse in us to return to our roots, to find where our ancestors have belonged, and to allow that to filter into our identities. Some of you might have watched the television series, Who Do You Think You Are? Often the accessing of these roots and heritage can be a deeply emotional and enlightening and enriching experience. Recently, I was able to walk the fields and the Burren in County Clare in Ireland. I don't know if anyone else has been there. Which held some of my ancestral roots. And in doing so, I found it peaceful and strangely soothing. And as we've heard in recent weeks, the book of Nehemiah recounts the return of the Israelites to Jerusalem, their homeland, their roots, their history, and the rebuilding of the temple and the wall to reclaim that sense of belonging that had become lost in exile. We've seen in this book, and others have talked about this, that there's a rhythm of the spiritual and the practical in Nehemiah. While the wall was important to protect the exiles on their return and the temple for their spiritual practices, each stage and challenge was underpinned by prayer. Both the spiritual and physical seem to have their own significance and influence and inform each other. By the time we reach chapter 9, the scattered people of Israel are freshly returned from exile. The temple and the walls of Jerusalem have been rebuilt, but now comes the important work of rebuilding hearts and grounding their hearts in their ancestral God's story. In verses 1 and 2, we're introduced to the returned exiles communally confessing their sins and the sins of their ancestors. Now on the 24th day, I'm reading now from Nehemiah, verses 1 to 2. Now on the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembled with fasting and in sackcloth, and with earth on their heads. Then those of Israelite descent separated themselves from all foreigners, and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their ancestors. So we notice here they're taking their failures and unfaithfulness seriously, humbling themselves before God and deepening their commitment to remembering who they are and who their Creator is. Such communal confession is not something we see very often in our contemporary sort of context. We can have a confession component of worship, and we know we can seek forgiveness at any time in our personal prayers. And certainly the gift of mercy and forgiveness, as expressed through Jesus, is a repeated message of the gospel. And the well-known verse in John 3:16 highlights that or captures that. Indeed, God did not send the Son in the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. In our times, the mistakes, failings and traumas of previous generations tend to be explored in the professional counselling space to address any lingering effects of our history in the present. And these can be places of accountability and honest reflection in our daily lives. These things all have their role and value in growing in our life and faith journeys. In the rest of chapter 9, Ezra recounts the Israelites' entire history, from Abraham to their present moment, including both God's faithfulness and their repeated disobedience. It reminds them that in spite of their and their ancestors' neglect and failing, they have been and still are loved by God. So now I'm reading from verses 16 to 21. It was too much to read the whole chapter. But they and our ancestors acted presumptuously and stiffened their necks and did not obey your commandments. They refused to obey and were not mindful of the wonders that you performed among them. But they stiffened their necks and determined to return to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God, ready to forgive, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and you did not forsake them. Even when they had cast an image of a calf for themselves and said, "This is your God who brought you up out of Egypt," and had committed great blasphemies, you, in your great mercies, did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud that led them in the way did not leave them by day, nor the pillar of fire by night that gave them light on the way in which they should go. You gave your good Spirit to instruct them and did not withhold your manna from their mouths and gave them water for their thirst. The chapter repeats this pattern with constant examples of Israel's history, the human story of losing sight of God, and the God story, how often God forgave them and nurtured and blessed them. This litany reminds us how easily we can forget to keep our hearts focused on God in all the very human endeavours, challenges, complexities and stresses in which we necessarily become involved. When I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the Lord's Prayer, which we recently spent some focused time on with Pete Greig. I was just reminded that this prayer beautifully expresses a deep understanding of our human story, the things that can pull at our hearts, keeping us from experiencing life's fullness when we engage with the God story. It acknowledges our tendency to become absorbed in our own stories or become complacent and lose touch with God, much like the Israelites that we meet through the early stories of our faith tradition. When Jesus taught us to pray, the first 4 statements are all about God, the God story first. Firstly, we honour and recognise the presence and power of our Creator. And I've thought I'd read from the Aramaic translation, which is closer to the original meaning and brings a bit of a freshness, a fresh perspective. And I guess I'm thinking about how this prayer helps us tend to our hearts and be vigilant around what's important. So, O thou, the breathing life of all, creator of the shimmering sound that touches us, help us breathe one holy breath feeling only you, which creates a shrine inside us in wholeness. The prayer then invites us to open ourselves to contribute to the kingdom of God. Let your counsel rule our lives, clearing our intention for co-creation, then humbling ourselves and submitting to the will of God. Your one desire acts with ours, as in all light, so in all forms. After the focus on the Creator then, trusting for our daily needs. Grant what we need each day in bread and insight, subsistence for the call of growing life, and asking forgiveness for our own sins and those who have sinned against us. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt, and asking to be protected from temptation and evil. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back from our true purpose. It seems that Jesus knew exactly what would distract us from the God story, not unlike the Israelites in exile, and gave us a prayer to tend to our very human hearts. The human story is that we tend to forget that we are loved, that we are blessed, and that we belong. I know I do at times. The God story is that we are never forgotten. We are always loved, and we belong to God, each other, and the earth as our home. The chapter ends with the people making a new commitment to live faithfully. The chapter reminds us that we can always make a fresh start, and often we need to. So we're going to just take a little bit of time to reflect on where our hearts are today. And we're going to listen to a song that I came across in Ireland that I'll tell you a bit about in a moment. So So we're just going to reflect on, maybe it might be gratitude, confession, or simply basking in knowing that we are loved, blessed, and belong. It's really about whatever's touching your heart today. Are there things that might be holding us back from allowing the God story to filter through our lives? Do we need a reset or tuning up of our faith journeys? Are there things that we're holding on to that we might gently let go of? A bit about the song that's going to play while we think about that, while we give ourselves a bit of time to tend our hearts. One of my favourite places in Ireland was Inishmore in the Aran Islands. Anyone been there? Yep. It's a pretty special place. And there we met Deirdre Kennedy. That's not the Irish name. I don't know how to say the Irish name. Who has a small retreat room next to her home on Inishmore. She's a singer and interestingly has a background in psychotherapy. She began our time, we had a morning with her in her retreat space, and she began our time with her saying that her place was a place for tending and healing hearts. And as we started our morning session with her, we sang a song that she had written that she sings and has recorded. And the song is, in English, Open My Heart. In Irish, and I hope no one's Irish here because I don't have the Irish accent at all, Oscar Mo Cree. As we took time to tend our own hearts. The song simply repeats, Open My Heart. So I invite you to close your eyes while we ponder where our hearts are at today and enjoy Deirdre singing, Open My Heart.
Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Mo Cree, Oscar Oscar Mo Cree, 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 Oscar Mo Cree,
So in closing, I'm just going to read the first verse of a song by Digby Hannah. Some of you might know it, Deeper River. And then I'm going to hand over back to Noel. But these are the words. There's a river running deep within the silence of our souls, where the quenching, healing waters carve their art. At its source, a spring of living water surging and sustained. It's the voice of Jesus waiting for the listening of our hearts. Thank you.
I was going to finish with a song, but now I've changed my mind.